Every society reaches a moment where protection becomes urgent. Jobs are disappearing. Order is breaking down. The future no longer feels safe. People ask for help, for stability, for relief. But nothing comes. Democracy debates, markets demand discipline, and daily life keeps getting harder. That is the moment when something changes. People stop asking for protection. They start demanding order. This episode is about that turning point, the moment when societies are pushed so far that freedom itself begins to feel negotiable. At first, the shift is almost invisible. There is no dramatic rejection of democracy, no sudden embrace of tyranny. What disappears first is patience. People have already adapted once, then twice, then again. They accepted lower wages. They accepted unstable work. They accepted the idea that security was a thing of the past because they were told this was temporary, that the system needed time, that growth would return, that stability would follow. But time passes, and crisis becomes permanent. That is when something breaks, not politically, psychologically. Karl Polanyi understood this not as an abstract theory, but as lived reality. He was born into the old Austro-Hungarian world and watched it collapse. He saw liberal capitalism expand, democracy emerge, and then both fail under pressure. What struck him was not that societies reacted, it was how they reacted when normal channels stopped working. To understand this, Polanyi insisted we look closely at the period between the two world wars. Europe had just survived unprecedented destruction. Millions were dead. Economies were shattered. Currencies were unstable. At the same time, something remarkable happened. Democracy expanded. For the first time, large segments of the population, especially workers, gained political voice. In theory, this should have allowed societies to correct course. In reality, it created a trap. Governments faced an impossible dilemma. On one side, people demanded protection, jobs, food, housing, dignity. On the other side, markets demanded discipline, balanced budgets, stable currencies, confidence from international investors. Economic orthodoxy insisted that stability came first. Social needs could wait. Take the gold standard, which many countries tried desperately to restore after the war. Tying currencies to gold was meant to signal seriousness and stability. Markets loved it. But the cost was brutal. To defend the currency, governments had to cut spending, suppress wages, and tolerate mass unemployment. Every time people demanded relief, they were told it was impossible. The market would punish it. So democracy continued, but without power. Elections were held, parliaments debated, governments changed, but the core economic decisions remained untouched. People voted. Nothing changed. This is the condition Polanyi found most dangerous. Not dictatorship, not chaos, but blocked democracy. A system where political participation exists but cannot translate suffering into action. At first, people tried harder. They organized unions, they protested, they voted again. When center-left governments failed to deliver relief, voters turned to the right. When conservative governments imposed discipline, voters turned back. Round and round. Each cycle left people more exhausted. Slowly, frustration turned into distrust. People stopped believing that debate mattered. They stopped listening to explanations. What they wanted was not persuasion, it was certainty. This is the psychological pivot Polanyi identified. When insecurity lasts too long, priorities change. Freedom begins to feel abstract. Participation feels slow. Compromise feels weak. Order, by contrast, feels concrete, immediate, reassuring. This is when authoritarian movements gain traction, not by attacking democracy directly, but by presenting it as ineffective, too slow, too divided, too weak to act. They promise something democracy could no longer deliver: stability. These movements spoke a different language, not rights, but duty, not debate, but unity, not uncertainty, but direction. They offered clear enemies, clear goals, clear commands. And most importantly, they offered relief from chaos. Polanyi was deeply disturbed by one specific pattern. Authoritarian regimes did not dismantle the market system. They preserved it. Factories continued operating, private property remained, production resumed. What changed was society's ability to resist. Unions were suppressed, opposition silenced, dissent criminalized. Markets were protected by force. This is one of Polanyi's most unsettling conclusions. Fascism, he argued, was not anti-capitalist. It was capitalism shielded from society. When democratic protection failed, authoritarian protection stepped in. To Polanyi, this was not madness. It was tragic logic. When societies are denied protection through reform, they will accept protection through coercion. Not because they love repression, but because disorder has become unbearable. Think about how this feels at the individual level. Imagine years of instability. You lose your job. You find another, temporary. Your savings disappear. Your rent rises. You vote. You protest. You wait. Nothing improves. At some point, the question changes. You stop asking, "Who represents me?" You start asking, "Who can make this stop?" This is the emotional soil authoritarianism grows in. Not ignorance, not cruelty, exhaustion. Polanyi warned that this transformation happens quietly. People do not wake up one day demanding dictatorship. They demand normality, predictability, a future that makes sense again. Once fear becomes dominant, trade-offs shift. Civil liberties feel negotiable. Independent institutions feel obstructive. Checks and balances feel like delays. Order becomes the highest value. Polanyi did not argue that this outcome was inevitable. He argued it was conditional. It depended on whether societies were allowed to protect themselves early enough. When social protection is delayed, blocked, or dismantled, pressure does not disappear. It concentrates. This is why the double movement has a dark ending. If the first counter-movement, reform, regulation, welfare, is prevented, the second counter-movement is harsher, more rigid, more coercive, more dangerous. Bring this logic forward. You do not need uniforms or mass rallies to recognize the pattern. You see it when emergency powers never expire, when dissent is framed as sabotage, when complexity is replaced with slogans, when stability is valued above participation. Polanyi would warn us not to mistake this for strength. It is a sign of systems that refused to adapt until adaptation became impossible. The most uncomfortable lesson in Polanyi's work is this: freedom cannot survive prolonged insecurity. If people are forced to choose between chaos and control, they often choose control. This does not mean they stop caring about freedom. It means freedom becomes a luxury they feel they can no longer afford. Polanyi's warning is not about the past. It is about structure. Wherever markets are protected at all costs and societies are denied meaningful protection, the authoritarian temptation grows. And it grows not because people change, but because circumstances do. The tragedy, for Polanyi, was never authoritarianism itself. It was the failure that came before it. The failure to embed markets within social limits. The failure to protect society before desperation set in. Authoritarian order may feel stable at first, but it is brittle. It suppresses symptoms without addressing causes, and eventually, pressure returns. This is where Polanyi leaves us. with a warning, not a solution. If societies want to preserve freedom, they must protect themselves early, not after collapse, not after fear takes over, before order becomes more valuable than liberty. In the final episode, we will step back and connect everything, from market expansion to social breakdown to democratic failure to authoritarian temptation. And we will ask the hardest question of all: what does Karl Polanyi's warning mean now? In a world where markets are global, politics is fragile, and societies once again feel pushed to their limits. Masters of value.